Okay, noting the time and the presence of a quorum, I call the ABRSC to order. Welcome, everyone. Thank you to ActonTV for taping this meeting and provided on their website, actontv.org. Welcome back, everyone, from a long break. I hope everyone had a good vacation and a good start to the new year. Hopefully, we will have a quick meeting tonight. We don't have all that much on the agenda. So with that, I will give it to, public participation. This is the part of the meeting per policy BEDH when members of the public may speak up for up to 2 minutes on items. There are no public, right? You're high school, right? You're here because you're the high school rep, right? I just want to make sure. Okay. So we won't. We'll do our high school representatives update. I would like to call Rishi up to the microphone. You can give us your update.
Thank you. Hey guys, my name is Rishi, as Miss McKinley just mentioned, and I'm just going to give an update on what's been going on at school recently. And just off the bat, I think school has been going pretty smoothly since Thanksgiving break, other than like a couple of weeks right after Thanksgiving break where we had a couple of snow days. But I'm just going to mention like the concept of like the mid-years and like the change to like the summative exam. And I think that's actually really benefited the students at Acton-Boxborough Regional High School. And I think it's something that could really help decrease stress moving forward, especially for kids who are taking AP and honors courses, almost 4 to 5 AP and honors courses. The stress of having a mid-year that's worth around 10% of your total grade for the year is unbelievable. And I can say from personal experience, last year I spent almost 6 hours, 7 hours per day during Christmas break and right before mid-years just studying for those. And for kids who have like extracurriculars and sports after school, it's really tough doing that. And so I think the summative exams are a really good idea and kind of a low stress kind of exam because it's only worth 100 points. And so that's just part of your term grade. So I would say that's a good idea. Maybe one knock on it that I could think of is kind of like the regulations on the summative exam for like each individual subject or teacher administering the test. So like, for example, there's no like rule on like when you have to give it or like how often you have to give it. So I have a couple of classes where we haven't got a summative exam yet, but there are a couple of classes where I took a summative exam in like November, December. And so it's kind of hard to plan for when to study for certain units and certain topics for a lot of students if they don't know when they're taking these like different summative exams. But I think sports is going really well. I think the upper management and like all the coaches are doing really well. They're managing all the different teams and the courts really well. So I think extracurriculars are going well. The stress of school is going pretty well. And so I think school's going pretty good. Thank you.
All right, well, Happy New Year, everyone. I have a few updates for you. One, I just wanted to give you a quick update, and this relates to our district strategy, particularly around kind of the overarching objective around social emotional supports for students. As you recall, this fall we updated you that we were conducting a full-scale program evaluation of the social and emotional supports for the district. So, you know, if you remember the 4 quadrants that we talked about, our overarching objectives were engaged learning, inclusive practice, equitable opportunities and outcomes, and social emotional well-being of students. And so the idea of conducting the program evaluation for social emotional learning was in order to really gain a perspective on the current practices of the district and to have an independent lens come back to us and be able to report out on some opportunities that we have for growth. We had an initial conversation with the company that did that, which is District Management Group. They've finished their research around the district. I think they interviewed over 100 different educators in the district. They visited over 40 classrooms. It was really an in-depth, thorough program evaluation. They came back and met with us just after break on January 6th as a district leadership team, which included a whole variety of stakeholders. It was about 40 of us in the room. They gave us some preliminary thoughts on their findings, but rather than reporting out on those, the purpose of that was actually to come back and verify their thoughts and findings with our future input. What's happening now is they are taking our feedback on the findings, bringing that back and finalizing their report, and that will be given to us in the coming weeks. We will then be scheduling a time to be able to present that report publicly to you at one of the school committee meetings as we go through spring. And then the team of educators that we put together to help lead the work, which is called a guiding coalition, actually will be using that report to develop action plans that will inform that strategic objectives, action steps that we're going to be taking over the next few years. I wanted to just kind of give you that framework so you understood how we were going about developing some of the actions to that. It really is an evidence-based, research-based approach to looking at our social emotional programming. We don't necessarily do that for every one of our strategic objectives, but in that area we thought it was important to get a good independent eye on what we were doing. So happy to answer any questions about that. But we also just had about 300 of our families across the district, and they are our newest families, so we were welcoming the kindergarten class of 2033, if you can believe that. That's very exciting. We gave them some information about the school selection process and an overview of kindergarten programming. We also shared the exciting news that the school committee had set all-day kindergarten tuition for the incoming class at $3,750, which is a $750 reduction from the prior year, and had made a longer-term commitment to implementing tuition-free all-day kindergarten. So we just want to thank all of the school and district administrators and staff who had helped plan that night. And then finally, Tessa and I have set dates for the next 3 community coffees due to some feedback we received and a request to hold some evening sessions. We actually have scheduled the next community coffee for Tuesday night, January 21st from 7 o'clock to 8:30 p.m., which will be held here in the admin auditorium. And then the upcoming dates after that are Friday, February 7th, and that's a morning from 8 to 9:30, and then Tuesday, March 10th, back at an evening session for 7 to 8:30 p.m., and all of them are right here in the admin auditorium. So happy to take any questions or comments, but that's the superintendent's update for the week and the beginning of the new year.
Two seconds. I just wanted to say, I remember my very first kindergarten meeting, and Marie standing up there and say, okay, welcome to the class of 2020. And we were all like, oh my God, that's insane. So yeah, it sounds like a long way away, but it's not that far.
All right, thank you, Peter. Item 3.1, under ongoing businesses, we have 2 sets of draft minutes with small edits on page 3 of each set that were in the addendum. So unless you want to discuss them or there was any other changes, I'll entertain a motion to approve them. Yes, Angie?
So on the page, which page number I'm trying to get? Page 2. So,
Of which set of minutes?
oh, the
There's
latest one,
There's December 5th and December 19th.
19.
Okay.
Yeah, the 19. So page 2, I asked a question about that there's a new math trial that will be implemented, so it will be discussed in a later meeting. So it didn't talk about whether that will be jotted down and in a separate meeting.
Do you want me to respond? So, I mean, so that piece of the presentation was about MCAS, and it isn't a transcript of what happened at the meeting. I mean, that is going forward. That was the understanding. I don't know that it needs to be noted.
So what I will say, Angie, if the committee's interested, we're happy to come in and do a presentation this spring on the trial that we're looking at for next year. That would actually be fantastic. We'd love to do that.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, those minutes are approved from December 5th and December 19th. All right, item 3.2 is our FY21 budget update. In your packet, there is a memo. And
All All right, well, good evening, everyone. I am going to just talk briefly. I know right after this, we're going to head into the OPEB presentation, so if Dave wants to head up to the presenter table, I will just give you a quick update. There's a memo in your packet with an update. Essentially, we had some personnel costs that still had to be finalized in the FY21 budget when we last presented it to you. Now that we've finished entering all of the individual staff members into the database, there's about $100,000 total cost shift in it, which is an increase to that bottom line budget. So it's a $100,000 increase to the budget. However, in the meantime, the governor also released the supplemental budget for FY19, which increased regional transportation. And based on Dave's analysis of that, he's actually anticipating that they'll probably keep that revenue at level, and we'll end up seeing about $100,000 more in revenue into the next year. So the two balance each other out. What you will note, though, it does result, if you look at the second page of the memo, it does result in an increase to the budget, which goes from 3.18% to 3.29%. However, because it's offset with additional revenue coming in, there's no change to the assessments in both towns. So it's something that ends up being a wash in the big picture of the budget, but we wanted to just make you aware and make sure we were accounting for those changes. Any questions on that? I'm happy to.
Obviously, that is clear, and I understand the offset. But I think from a ability to interpret the top line increase, maybe one of the numbers that I don't think we've looked at, and Dave can correct me if I'm wrong, is what the percent change in revenues is. So we get, because that's where you'd see the other part of the variance is your projected revenue has gone up, and so since we only talk about the budget going up X. If we also talked about revenues going up related to that, that would help understand why the assessments haven't moved.
No, that makes a lot of sense. No, thank you. And so for Budget Saturday, we're working on the budget binders now, but in about a week, we'll actually release the budget binders, and all of that detailed information will be in the budget binder. So, but great comment. Thank you.
I think my preliminary memo from the December meeting had that variance in dollars and percent, but obviously it's changed, so we'll need to update it.
Yes, because the
Yes.
other, so actually I can just make one more comment. So in your packets too, this is not a separate presentation. We don't do it as a presentation, but we do give you the budget projections by admin responsibility summary and character code. That's in your packet. It's not a presentation tonight. It's actually an anticipation of the work we're going to do on Budget Saturday, and it's just so that we're getting you information well in advance of Budget Saturday, but it's not intended to be a presentation. The two main presentations tonight are on OPEB and then capital. So.
And similarly, you've got the what's called Table 6 assessment calculation, and that again isn't intended to be presented tonight, but it's the coming attraction of what's in the Budget Saturday presentation. Okay? Ready for this? Peter? OPEB? Okay. This can be both a dry topic and, because of the size of the liabilities, a depressing one. But I promise it's going to be fairly brief, and it's going to end on an up note. Okay. I'm sorry? Uh-oh, I'm getting predictable. So at first glance, you may say, what do these three things have in common? And I submit that they collectively have and will take, there's a way to put them together. Certainly, individually and collectively, when you look at how much money we're talking about here, they're taking an increased share of the district's budget. And we're going to look at some similarities and how one can ultimately help to offset the other. Why are these costs increasing? So again, I should have said publicly that the three costs that were in here are retiree health insurance, OPEB, which I'll get into that later, and the Middlesex County Retirement System assessment. Why are these costs increasing? Well, inflation, head counts, life expectancy even. If somebody's going to take a retirement annuity for 35 years instead of 25 years, that amount of money is going to be higher in the long run. Why the liability is increasing, you can blame the accountants. There was a realization that benefits are earned and costs accrue during employment and not after. So until about 40 years or so ago, most governments accounted for retirement benefits, particularly on a cash basis. Retirees get their pension, they get paid, the payment gets booked, and away you go. And that system is called pay-as-you-go. But the accountants got wind of what was happening in that as costs increased, as the number of people employed increased, as their life expectancy increased, et cetera, the liability that could be determined on an actuarial basis was going to, in some cases, cripple governments. And you can see that in the long run, John might back me up on this, if a total government's spending goes up by, let's say, 3% a year, and one component of that, even if it's a relatively small one, goes up on long-term basis 8% a year, there's some time, it might be well after we're all gone, but at some point, the smaller number is going to cross the larger number because simple mathematics. And so they said, you need to get that under control. You need to do an actuarial determination of the cost of providing these retirement benefits and OPEB benefits. So I'm going to talk about retirement quickly first. The retirement system, what we're talking about for Acton-Boxborough is not the teachers, it's everybody but certified staff. It's administered by Middlesex County Retirement System. There are other cost-sharing and standalone systems, like, for example, the Mass Teachers Retirement System. Districts like Acton-Boxborough, the towns, do not make a contribution to that system. It's fully funded by the members and by the state. The target for determining when the system is fully funded, meaning that the liability that never was recognized during the pay-as-you-go days, that liability is expected to be paid off in 2035 per the actuarial report. And you can get some more information about this. I've listed a website. You can also look at the Middlesex County Retirement System website and look at the actuarial report. If you're really adventurous, that's reading that looks more daunting than it is, as I explained to Paul the other day, who asked about it. It's 100 some odd pages, but 80 some odd of it are the individual entities, and it's one page per entity. So there's one for Acton-Boxborough, there's one for Acton, there's one for Boxborough, and there's 70 odd that don't have any meaning for us. So what happens? The liability for non-certified staff can be determined by the actuaries and reported, and in the Middlesex County Retirement Systems report, they've quantified that liability at about $55 million for this district. So $55 million as of today is the value that will have to be paid out to beneficiaries at their retirement. There's money that they have collected from the future pensioners and from the assessment to the district, and the value of those assets is about $27.5 million as of January 1st, 2018, the latest actuarial date. And so we're about 50% funded. Sounds good? I don't know. 50% is not 100%, but it's not zero. The assessment to the district is broken down into two pieces. One is called the normal cost, and that is the cost that the employees have earned based on their service for this year. So if we accounted for retirement costs on an accrual basis, next year that cost would be $693,000. But because for many years the district had been paying on a pay-as-you-go basis and the liability for future benefits grew significantly in that time, there's an old liability to be retired, and the contribution to that will go over $2 million next year. So the district's assessment for its retirees, its non-certified retirees, will be $2,845,000 next year, 3/4 of it being to retire the existing liability. The actuaries have determined that increases of 6.5% a year system-wide for another 7 years, and then 4% thereafter will get this to full funding. And what does that look like graphically to the district? It's a fairly steep curve, obviously. For 7 years, that bar is increasing by 6.5%, and I point out that 6.5% of a bigger number every year is a bigger number every year. But look what happens. I'm going to try my laser pointer here for those who are looking at with me. By 2035, when they project full funding, the assessment the following year drops significantly, and that's because the piece that has to do with retiring the prior debt is no longer required. The retirement liability is fully funded, and that piece is not necessary, only the normal cost. And so there's a significant cliff. We usually talk about funding cliffs in a bad sense. This is a good sense. There's a lot of money freed up at that point, and we'll just hold the thought on that and come back to it. Do we have questions about retirement at this point? I'm about to transition into OPEB.
I just have a quick one. Looking at these numbers, 6.5% and 4%, and then this cliff, what was the reason with which to retire this liability in 15 years from now, as opposed to taking it out even further and not having such a dramatic increase over time?
I believe, because I've been around for this long, that back in the 80s, the plan was to retire this in over a 50-year period of time. And so we're 35 years through that period of time. If not for 2008 and the Great Recession's impact on retirement assets, there was, in general, about a 30% loss in retirement assets. We're 50% funded. Had they been able to take the money out of the market, wait, okay, lost 30%, put it back in, we'd be close to fully funded. Of course you can't do that. One of the things most prohibitively about that is the size of the investment pool, and you just can't withdraw quickly and efficiently that amount of money, even if they thought they could time it. So they're investing for the long term. They make, on average, 8 to 9% return over a 30-year basis, and those are the numbers that go into projecting the liability and when full funding is achieved. But 2035 wasn't decided upon this year, last year, a couple of years ago. It's been there for a long time.
Do you have any idea of the average that other districts and municipalities across the Commonwealth, where their average is on their savings?
Just an educated guess would be between 40 to 80. Some of them, the usual suspects, can get close to full funding. This would be something that, if you're intellectually curious about it, you can go on the Middlesex County website or the Mass Teachers Retirement System website for the teachers aspect of it. And there's typically one page per entity, and it gives you that statistic, and you can very easily zero in on the funded ratio, and it'll be in the same spot in every one, and just pick a city or town or district and see what it is. But I would say we're not near the top on this one. 50% is, I would submit, about average.
To sort of follow up on Adam's question, Is there a statutory requirement that we be fully funded in 2035?
That's a good question. I don't know.
And so we can look into that later, I'm sure. The other question that I had is, obviously, looking at these projections assumes a couple of things. One is it assumes, a growth rate in your expenses, and the other thing is it assumes a return rate. It's been my belief that a lot of times when these projections are created, there's a somewhat rosy view of the return rate, and I was wondering if you had a comment about that. And related to that, by way of rosy returns, when 2019 is in the books, whatever the assumption was here, it surely will be beaten. And the question is that likely in the short term, the next year or two, to have any impact on this?
What's happening probably with the county systems, definitely with Mass Teachers and the state system, is they've been ratcheting back their investment return assumptions. It used to be 8%. It was 8% forever. Coming out of the Great Recession, they didn't want to reduce 8% because they needed it to catch back up for the money that had been lost in 2008. But there's a new normal, and we'll talk about that. That new normal is manifested in the interest rates we're looking at paying for debt. And so the systems have gone from an 8% assumption to 7 3/4, 7.5, and they've been pretty consistently going down by 1/4 of a point to they're around 7 now. The 30-year averages are still in the 8 to 9 range, but they've recognized that it may not be sustainable in light of, you can't park money in anything that's going to raise your average. And when you've got billions and billions of dollars on account and you're trying to make an average return of 7 or 8%, that $500 million that you put in a money market just for safety that's earning 0.2% really puts a drag on the average. So the short answer to your question is they've recognized that and the rosiness is something that they have tried to wash out a little bit. Okay.
You mentioned earlier from the longevity. So I understand the insurance industry this year, they have a new longevity table because people live longer now. So I was wondering, we know people are living averagely longer now. So I wonder if that will have an impact on our funding or reserve, or is it at the local level, or at the state level, or is there anything we need to adjust with the new estimate?
So what I'm going to go back to is the actuarial liability of $54.8 million. That's a specific number that the actuaries determine based on looking at all of the people who are Acton Boxborough employees and retirees who are participants in that system. And their actuarial assumptions include mortality tables. That's beyond my area of expertise to know what those mortality tables mean, but suffice to say that people live longer today than they did 50 years ago when this was undertaken. They factor all those things in coming up with these with these amounts.
You have that change going from the 6.5 to the 4%, and that, I mean, there's a certain crystal ball aspect to this because it's not necessarily given that the 4% will kick in at that date. So we should
They say it will. That's in the system's actuarial report. Is 6.5 runs through FY27 and 4% thereafter. It's in their report,
okay.
And it's been there for a few years.
Okay.
Okay, so on to a cousin topic in my view. There are many similarities conceptually and accounting-wise between OPEB and pensions. So the cocktail party answer, what does OPEB stand for? Other post-employment benefits. And again, we can thank GASB for the acronym. It basically translates to be the cost of retiree health insurance premiums. So we have employees today, some, many, most, whatever, of whom will retire through the district and be entitled to a health insurance subsidy as a retiree, typically 50%. That's the minimum requirement in state law. And so, similar to the pensions, going on a pay-as-you-go basis was going to, because, again, increased longevity. Somebody retires and they live longer, and their health insurance costs and health insurance premiums last longer. The cost of health care specifically drives the cost of health insurance premiums. All of those things the accountants recognized. OPEB ought to be treated the same as pensions, and we ought to quantify the actuarial liability and set it up now. And last year was the district's first year where that was actually reported on our independent audited financial statements. One significant difference, the third bullet, the mandated target for full actuarial funding, there is none. How could the state, and this is a state-by-state thing, how could the state mandate its cities, towns, and districts to contribute to an OPEB fund in this day and age where money is very tight? I don't think it's going to happen. And so districts are falling further and further behind on actuarially funding their OPEB liability. Again, I've given you a link if you want some more in-depth knowledge about this. The district's financial statements have some information as well. And just really quickly, I got this today. This is an email from our OPEB actuary that says, "We know how much you love GASB." Peter, this came to me and not you. If you're still interested, they've launched a YouTube channel called OPEB University. I am not making that up. So, with that general discussion, we can see what does that mean to Acton Boxborough. You did a great thing in 2012. You formed an irrevocable, and that's accounting and legalese, OPEB trust under Mass General laws. And what it means is you can't use it. You can't touch it. It's there, and it's going to be there to ultimately pay health insurance claims sometime distant from now. The OPEB trust has 4 trustees, 2 from the school district, 1 from both towns' finance committees, and the district treasurer is the custodian. We've hired a consultant to invest the money. We met last month now. The time is flying. And the actuary reported that the district is better than most. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they cited some best practices in the manner in which we're investing the money, that we have funding policies, that our funded ratio is better than most, and I'll show you that in a second. But at $900,000 a year, we're among the best in the state as far as funding its OPEB liability. These numbers look eerily similar, at least the liability. So again, just like the retirement liability, OPEB liability as of the most recent year is over $50 million. That's the future value of the cost of health insurance to retirees, those people who have earned those benefits today. It's a tough concept to get your head around, but that number is quantifiable by actuaries using certain estimates. Unlike the retirement system, we're not 50% funded here. We're about 10% funded. Interestingly, the item in red, unfunded actuarial liability, has gone up $2 million in a year, but our funded ratio has gone up by 4%. And you say, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, it does, because we're contributing that the actuarial liability, the top line, went up $4 million in a year. The value, or about 6% maybe. The value of assets almost doubled, went from 2.9 to 5.2 million. So the assets are growing at a faster rate because it's a smaller number, but that translates to getting further along the funded ratio line than you might otherwise think. If the current funding trend continues, we'll be at full actuarial funding in 2097, and by projected funding trend, I mean if we continue to put $900,000 a year into the OPEB trust. It will take close to a century to retire that liability. Some things important to realize: how trend estimates impact the calculation of fewer costs. The actuaries do adjust these over time. I'd love to think that as a country we can effectively tame the rate of healthcare cost growth, but you never know. But you can see that just a 1% change, and these numbers are required to be reported in our financial statements, creates a huge swing in the actuarial liability. And so, tying this all together, this chart is not perfect, but there's a strategic option here. Remember back in the retirement presentation in 2035, if close to $4 million drops out of the district's need to fund, so we no longer need to fund the past liability, if that money is redirected into OPEB, the actuary, at my request, did a calculation, and full funding would be achieved by 2049, not 2097. And so for the next 15 years, we're going to need to pay the Middlesex County assessment. By the time 2035 comes around, that assessment's going to be $5 million plus or minus. Once full funding is achieved, that $5 million won't be needed anymore. It'll be down to a little over $1 million at the current projection. What the district does with that surplus, if you will, $4 million, will not be my decision, clearly. But if a future liability that can be quantified on an actuarial basis that ultimately will have to be paid, and it's a pay me now or pay me later, and what this graph unfortunately doesn't show is the area inside the little not so curvy curve and from 25 to 35, those dollars are less than what's in the yellow bar. In other words, if we wait and just continue to pay the green line $900,000 a year, it's going to take all the way out to the far right of that graph to fully fund OPEB. Whereas by redirecting money that we're already budgeting and here's going to be where discipline is required, not putting it toward other uses, we'd be able to retire that liability 2 full generations earlier than 2097. I hope this was somewhat helpful. This is a complicated topic. I get a little antsy about it. I can't say actuarial with certainty all the time, but questions?
Assuming that you had full Article I powers and could do anything that you wanted to do, the way this is structured is to say we're basically going to focus on discharging one liability and then discharge our other liability. Is there any reason to care about which of these two we're working on? In other words, if I simply looked at our liability as the sum of these two and was agnostic as to where we were chipping away, why would I care?
I don't think that it matters. You've got 50 million plus 50 million, 100 million of which 56 million's been put aside. A colleague of mine on the Mass Society of CPAs governmental committee once upon a time, and this is a while ago, but when OPEB first became a thing, And people said, what? You mean we have another telephone number liability that we have to put in financial statements? One of the thoughts was to combine the retirement liability with the OPEB liability, make it one liability and one set of assets. And the thought was, the retirement board does a great job investing money. I don't think they want to get their hands dirty with this because they're a lot closer to full funding. But the answer, a dollar is a dollar. On that basis, it really doesn't matter.
I just have a general question about this option. You come here with this option is like for the awareness to us, or is it like you're thinking the support or even approval in the future? This is the first question. The second question is that, this is only one option. Do you have other options?
So the first question is very important. No, this isn't a proposal or a recommendation. This is not something that that you can tie your hands now for something you're going to do 15 years from now. First and foremost, there isn't an ironclad guarantee that the retirement liability will be fully funded. That's step one. But it's more of an FYI from the standpoint of somebody who's made a career in government. OPEB has always been, how the heck are we ever going to find the money to retire that liability? Well, here's how. This is a relatively painless way to do it, assuming everything comes true as is written in the documentation. Relatively. You will have budgeted for $5 million to pay Middlesex County a decade and a half from now. If the following year, $4 million drops into the district's lap, you can spend it on whatever you want to do. But if you want to, for a number of reasons, enhance your bond rating, ultimately satisfy a liability in better terms than waiting until it grows out of control, that's an option. And, sorry, Michael, the follow-up question? Other options. I didn't present the other ones that the actuary prepared for me, but sure, you can take the $900,000 that we currently pay and he's done them, increase it by 3% a year until full funding, increase it by $100,000 a year until full funding, increase at full funding plus the amount redistributed to OPEB and grow that by 3%. There's not as big a bang. You don't get another 40-year reduction in the years to retirement. It goes from like 2049 to 2046 or 2043. It's still a lot shorter than 2100, effectively. But so there are options, and I guess the biggest takeaway is if you understand this conceptually and on a general basis, then what we need to do is look every year at the reports. How are we doing funding-wise? What are the assumptions? What is the current trend? And has the needle moved at all, plus or minus? And in even 5 years' time, if somebody at me or whoever else is sitting at this table says, well, if we do this, we should be able to have this liability paid off by 2049, then we're on track. If it slips, it'll slip. It could slip by a lot. It could slip by not so much in the other direction.
I think that, this topic of the Middlesex retirement was touched on last night, and it was touched on, in the spirit of, this terrible thing that's happening to us, this assessment increasing 6.5% every year. And I think this was a much better presentation of the issue because it says we've got, a significant issue that we need to deal with over the longer term. And so it strikes me as I heard this, that this is a little bit like the process the district has gone through with a capital, looking at our facilities and whether we had appropriate investments in facilities and we were maintaining things over time. This is part of the overall strength and financial picture of the district. So maybe, as we go forward, if there are some ways to recognize that the two things really can be bundled, independent of how they exist in paper and your ledgers. For the purpose of us looking at it, it's just like our buildings. We got our different buildings. They have to be maintained. We have our different future liabilities. They have to be considered. I would like to see us put it in that context, and then just as you said, every year monitor how we're doing and treat it not as, this terrible thing that's happening, but rather treat it as, here's a significant issue that we are working to address to make sure we have an appropriate financial position.
First of all, Dave, thanks for once again taking a fairly complex topic and making it digestible. I do have a question about what we're looking at here, particularly the $900,000 a year that goes towards this liability in the trust. When you talked about the retirement liability, you had two numbers. You had what our normal cost is per year that we pay, which was around $700,000 this year, plus the $2 million, which goes towards the unfunded liability. The $900,000 that we're paying today, does that cover both of those, or is there another budget line that goes towards the normal cost of OPEB on a yearly basis?
The reason those are quantified is that there's a legal responsibility to pay that assessment, and so they've split it into the two pieces. That's not how it's funded. Add them together, and that's the bill that we get. The $900,000 has nothing to do with funding anything in particular. It's a number that the district has settled upon, starting at about 200 and change and increasing it to where we are now at 900,000. That's just a number.
So there are other costs that are in the budget to pay for OPEB expenses that are happening in this year?
Retiree health insurance.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. So for me, that's a piece of this sort of puzzle that's missing that doesn't correlate with what we looked at from the retirement side of that?
That's why I put this, I started with this, and so they all agree, and you see, I mean, they all are similar.
Yeah.
And you can look at the trend of the three of them in the aggregate, and it's gone up by close to $2 million just in the last 7 years.
Yeah. I think, in along John's comment around what would be helpful in terms of yearly reporting is to be able to see what we're paying out in the same slide, similar to what you were showing in slide 9, I think.
Okay.
Where we were saying, no, not slide 9. I don't know where it
right here
is best. But something that shows, okay, we're doing the $900,000 towards the future costs, and we're doing X amount towards retiree health insurance.
Good point. I claim that the two are similar, so I should make them look similar. Sure.
But otherwise, thank you.
On Budget Saturday last year, you had mentioned that whether or not cities and towns and districts wait until their pensions are fully funded and have freed up resources, there's going to need to be a sea change in how the OPEB liability is funded. We can't rely on waiting. So for me, that as a school committee member, approving budgets, that says to me that year by year we have to really look at, it's $900,000 enough? Should that be bumped up? What does that do to exhaust that liability in light of the 2035 kind of windfall?
I think it stands to reason that if the legislature, if the state government sees that after full funding of pension systems happens, cities and towns have all this additional money, now you might get impetus for a state mandate to require actuarial funding of OPEB plans. I don't know how you do it until you're able to have that kind of wherewithal. 50 years ago, the numbers were a lot smaller. The entree into it was a lot smaller off the ground. The numbers have gotten big because bigger numbers at a higher rate are bigger numbers.
So I guess my question is, in terms of what is actionable on our part, it seems like what you said last year, it makes me, we can wait until a windfall happens, and then hopefully whoever's is sitting on school committee, unless there's some kind of legislative direction, can do what they want with that money, or we can be more conservative now and, do kind of a more responsible thing.
Excuse me. I think that the chart shows, the takeaway is that by redirecting the windfall, if that's what you're talking about, when the retirement system's fully funded, by redirecting that, you shave a half century off the full funding of the liability. Things you do to tweak from there, increasing the trust fund contribution by 100,000. So if we put in $1 million this year and $1.1 million next year, et cetera, that's not going to have anywhere near the same bang. It will reduce the number of years, but not by the same amount. Again, it's a political decision every year. It's appropriating resources to best benefit all of the stakeholders in the district.
Two general questions. So it's the same question. What is the comparable percentage-wise to other towns and other schools?
This one's a lot more over the map because I think for a lot of places the answer is 0. I thought I saw something here. No, it's some. Number of municipalities funding their OPEB liability increased from 79% to 88% over the year. So this is revealing is that 88% of the districts in Massachusetts are at least funding something. The district where I came from contributed $25,000 one year. Okay, but it unlocked the door. It didn't even open the door. At least started to unlock it. It's a massive liability, and you can't look and say, okay, we've got another $1 million paid. Where do we stand now? You have to take a long view.
Second question is, do we anticipate for the percentage of retiree, do we anticipate any spike, or is that pretty average every year?
That's, again, the actuaries determine the liability, and they take a very long view and use estimates, and it's not, Vertolino retired this year, so we're going to have the liability is going to go up. No, it's not as granular as that.
Thank you so much, Dave. Yes.
Well, here's my thank you to all of you for listening. For listening to me. Wait for it.
Yay.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. All right. JD, you've got a tough act to follow.
So actually, the three of us are going to present together.
I'm staying. I need to switch packets.
Yeah, exactly. Funny or scary?
No, you got it.
All right, so hello again from a different location. It's always nice to change perspective. So we want to do a few things tonight with our capital presentation. Obviously, we spent a lot of time on capital last year, and we're able to bring to fruition really a multi-year plan, and so this is a continuation of that. We will not be going into as much detail as we did over the last year, simply because last year was a multi-year plan. What we do want to do, however, is give you an overview of capital planning and just a quick snapshot of the process. The memo in your packet gives a more detailed historical perspective. I thought that was important just to keep that refreshed in everyone's mind how we got here. We want to give you a recap tonight of the FY20 work and where that stands now and what will continue through the end of this year. Talk a little bit about bond issuance and update you as to where we stand with that, and then talk a little bit about the broad picture of the FY21 capital budget, and then the FY21 capital projects that we're intending to complete through that budget, and then finally some summary and next steps for you. So just to recap, this has been an extensive multi-year process that we used to develop the capital improvement plan. And if you recall, last year, the school committee authorized the development of a capital subcommittee. The capital subcommittee contracted with Skanska, which is a project manager, to help us cull the original Dorr and Whittier report from 2015 and to be able to bring that into a workable document that we could execute over a number of years. The capital budget that we're presenting to you is based on that capital improvement plan developed last year. And in that capital improvement plan, every year we have included a small amount of discretionary capital, knowing that principals in various buildings want to continue to develop some of the program that they have at their school. And so that also is included in the budget, and we'll talk about that this year. I will say there are limitations to the capital plan that should be on the forefront of everyone's mind. The capital plan does not include Conant. It does not include the admin building, and it does not include the shed. I will say there are a couple of items from the admin building in the capital plan, but large scale, it does not really account for what we want to do with this building long term. So just keep that in mind, because I think that would be a recommendation, I think is a good area of focus for the capital subcommittee to be thinking about, taking a lead on, is what do we want to do with these buildings over a longer period of time. The update, I have showed you this before, but our capital website is now fully active, and we provide quarterly updates on our projects which have been completed. So if you want to get there, again, you can go to capital planning under the superintendent's page of our district. So far, we've completed about $1.85 million in capital projects in FY20, and we have the other half to go, so just under $2 million to go between January and June of this year. And we are anticipating, prior to the high school windows, a positive variance to that. However, I will say in the last week we've had two actually pretty substantial systems go. One were some windows at the high school in the lower gym actually fell out, and so we're currently assessing what needs to be done with those. And the second one at the Parker Damon building, we had the fire alarm panel also fail. It was able to be put back into use for a period of time. However, we are intending to replace that over February vacation because it was a temporary fix, but it's a permanent failure that we anticipate. So it's just simply going to have to be done. So that's where we stand right now. We'll know more about the impact on any positive variance, but at the time we developed these slides, we were anticipating a positive variance at the end of the year. So, you know, hope is not a strategy, but we will continue to hope anyway. FY20, I will allow JD to talk to this slide.
You actually just kind of hit on that. You know, we had the windows. We don't know what the cost of the district will be. It'll certainly be an insurance claim there for that as well. So, you know, a portion of our cost area will be covered by insurance, but we will also incur some cost. The Parker Damon fire alarm panel, we found out today, is $29,000. I just added that about a half hour before I came over here. And then our next steps going into 21 is determine the use of the positive variance that we end up with, because I do believe we will have one. You know, some of those options might be to accelerate some of the projects in the capital improvement plan, do more with some other discretionary projects, or transfer to stabilization for later use.
If I can just say a word.
Please.
I think it's still early in the year where we do have about half of the capital projects still out there. It's still a little bit too early to understand what that positive variance looks like, but depending on the amount, we'll certainly be coming back to you in the coming months with some ideas about what we'd like to do. Ideally, we would love to just simply accelerate the capital improvement plan. That would be great. However, there's no assurance that some of the project we'd like to do could actually get done within the fiscal year. And so we also need to put it on your mind to be thinking a little bit longer term about that. There are always discretionary projects that principals want to do around the district, but we could also consider transferring the variance into the stabilization fund as a way to save for future years of this project, and for a year that maybe we don't have a positive variance. So just keep some of the options in mind.
This is the bonding hit. The fun stuff.
Yeah, the financing. So we're ready to embark, and we've been waiting until the new school project approval was won to see whether we go out for just the $7.5 million bond for the CIP or additional funding for the new school project. And so now that we have our marching orders there, we're going to be meeting with the financial advisor and getting that underway. sometime last year, I forget exactly when, but when the historicalness, if you will, of the low interest rates was revealed to us, we redid the capital planning proposal and realized that instead of doing short-term borrowing, and once upon a time we had assumed short-term borrowing was going to be in the 2 to 2.5% range, and the funding of the bonds would be in the 3.5 to 4% range. Well, if the bonds could, as expected, as you heard about their information in Acton last night, be sold at 2%, why do short-term borrowing? Let's get the bonds issued now. Let's start paying them back. And I've calculated that that's actually going to save $1 million in interest expense, even over a bond life as short as 10 years. That's the magic of compound interest in reverse. There's a short-term impact by doing the bond a year earlier, and that is instead of having cash available for projects in years 2 and 3, this year being 1, next year being 2, we're going to need to make the first repayment on the bond next year. So the principal and interest payments being accelerated, we're not going to replicate that money to do additional projects. We will redirect that money in the next 2 years. But overall, there's no impact on the ability to fund everything that we had, plus $1 million in saved interest, and over the same time frame. So as JD had said, there's some cost savings underway, and the only thing I wanted to add is we did consider the fact that we're running favorable on some of these capital projects when we looked at our appropriation for FY21 for capital, and we'll get into that in detail a little bit later. This is still me. So the capital budget for next year will come from two pieces. The operating budget contains a $1.2 million amount. We're recommending level funded, not a $250,000 increase, and that's what I was alluding to, that we've got some favorable experience with the projects to date, and so there's a bit of comfort that we're not going to lose anything in the long run if we defer increasing the capital spend to $1.5 million as originally planned. The funds from the $7.5 million bond, about $4.6 million of that will be earmarked to individual projects in the CIP. And the $1.2 million is detailed as follows. Pretty simple. $7.5 million, 10 years, $750,000 in principal. 2% is $150,000. So a total of that's not an estimate. That's an actual calculation if the bonds are sold at 2%. And then identified projects of $200,000, and our discretionary line item in Peter's plan that was implemented last year. We've always put aside $100,000 for discretionary projects. There's the $1.2 million that's in the budget for next year. And the bond proceeds that was in the last slide. So.
Yeah, so in that kind of discretionary line item, oh, please.
I think a question.
Oh, yeah, yep, absolutely.
Can we go back to the last slide? Yeah, here. So we will have, total $5.85 million for the capital plan for the budget year 2021, right? Mm-hmm. So does it mean that are we going to use a total of them, or just, we just have them?
So the 5.85 is more of a measure of progress and output and getting projects done than it is, we're not paying for them out of the same pot of money. So we're borrowing the whole $7.5 million. That will be available to us, and what we're projecting is $4.65 million out of that $7.5 million will occur during next fiscal year. Does that answer the question? Okay.
So looking at some of the projects specifically, out of the $100,000 discretionary capital line items, what we're calling it in that area, these have come from submittals throughout the budget process from our building leaders. We decided to go forward with a library flooring replacement project and some general softening of that space. Kind of, if we're going to move everything out of there completely and totally to replace the carpeting, the flooring, then we want to put it back together in a way that's maybe a little bit softer and more accommodating for our students. We also want to finish off the last of the commons in the high school cafeteria area. So those are those two line items for $100,000. Now, in the projects that were identified in the CIP, going back to last year, those items that would make up the $200,000 would be some grinder pumps at Blanchard, kitchen makeup air unit Blanchard, pipe installation, thermal wrap in Parker Damon, masonry chimney repairs junior high, and some design work at RJ Gray, which would be leading to capital work for FY22, and that's mainly Andrew's really interested in looking at locker rooms, kind of the lockers themselves and the hallways, the corridors, and then also other areas where he can try and soften that building as well. Now, the items that would be out of that $4.65 million, if you will, these are all out of the CIP as well, would be pool code and ADA upgrades. We're actually doing that design work right now. What that really entails is really trying to make that bleacher area in the pool used to saying that, more handicap accessible and safer. We need railings, and we need to change a number of different things in there to bring it up to a current code. Blanchard, we expect to see definitely, this is coming more and more clear to me. We're actually doing this design work right now. I see this as being a definite positive variance that we'll be discussing this time next year for Blanchard, kind of hidden into FY22. But I'm guessing, if I had to be put on the spot right this second, that this project will come in at about $500,000 to $600,000, and we're budgeted at 1.1. But again, we'll be talking about that this time next year, I'm sure. This is phase one of mechanical work that we're designing currently in Parker Damon building. If you hear me talking about like currently, out of that 1.9 million that Peter was talking about, things that are in progress right now, a lot of that stuff is design work that's feeding next year's project. So a lot of that stuff is right here. This will be the fruition of the design work that's happening right now. RJ Gray, mechanical upgrades and repairs. Again, that's in design right now. Finishing off the boiler repairs at this building to get through our winters. And then, of course, the kind of master plan on campus that we talked about at a couple meetings ago right here in this venue in much more detail.
All right. So we wanted to also include a couple of MSBA updates for you. I had forwarded an email to you from MSBA just so you had it for your own files. But essentially what we already know, and you've seen this and heard this already, but Blanchard, we had applied, but we're not accepted to the accelerated repair program for the roof and window project that we want to do. MSBA did not look at any projects that contained windows. They only looked at roofs, and they had some specific criteria around roofs. So if you included windows in your project, by default, you were deferred. So what we're intending to do is reapply this year only for the roof part of the project only. There's a February 14th deadline for that submission. So on February 8th, you will see the statement of interest.
The 6th.
Oh, February 6th, sorry, thank you. At the first February school committee meeting, you will see, the request for the vote to submit that project. I will say neither the roof or the windows are imminently needed for that building to be able to function. We don't have water pouring into the school. We don't have, considerable draft issues in the school. These are really upgrades that we want to do for the long-term health of Blanchard, so we're okay deferring those. What we would like to do is still continue to try to apply to MSBA and get that funding, because if we can recoup up to 49.75% of those costs, that certainly allows us to then reallocate what we have budgeted to future years. We did carry the full cost of all of those repairs in the capital improvement budget, so we have all of that cash available for the project, but we want to see if we can get the MSBA reimbursement, and there's really no harm in waiting that extra year or two to be able to go through that process. From a Conant perspective, we also, last year submitted an application for acceptance into the core program, knowing full well that MSBA will not accept the same district while a current project is underway. We will just simply do that every year so that they don't forget about us. We think that that's important with the MSBA process. You will see that again. That's a 4/8 deadline, or April 8th deadline. So the school committee meeting right before that will have that statement of interest for you as well. We will probably not get accepted for that project. I don't want to disappoint you later. So I'm trying to set the expectations at a reasonable level during this meeting. Some summary and next steps. So during this year, we have about $4 million in capital projects that will have been completed by the end of the fiscal year. For those of you who have been on the committee for a while or know the history of capital planning, just let that sink in. In FY20, we'll have completed almost $4 million in capital projects, and we're expecting a positive variance from those projects. We need to determine the use of that variance at some future school committee meeting once we have a better handle on what the variance might look like. We are preparing to issue the bond at this point so we can leverage the lower interest rates. Next year, we're planning almost $6 million in capital projects, and that does include the first year of principal and interest payments on that debt. An additional $1.2 million through the operating budget, and about a little over $4.5 million through those bond proceeds. MSBA applications will continue to be due in February and April, and we do need to keep at the forefront of our minds that we have to determine the future uses of the Conant School, the admin building, and the maintenance shed. So with that, we're happy to take any questions, and I did not include any memes on this one.
I still want to go back to that bond issue for the capital plan. Right now is that the year 21, we're going to exhaust 60% of the total bond we issue, right? The $4.65 million, versus $7.5 million we issue. So, so I'm expecting that the rest will be exhausted probably the next year to 22. And then my question to you is that, are you expecting more bonds will be issued after that, or if yes, then how often?
Okay, I think I misunderstood your question before, Michael. So we don't have it here, but the proposal that we put forth that resulted in the CIP being adopted was a 13-year plan, and the $7.5 million bond was a kickstart of the funding of those projects. It was by no means to say $4.6 million next year, another $3 million the following year, and $6 million. No, it's not like that. The 7.5 was intended to cover about 3 years worth of projects for a couple of reasons. One was the numbers themselves and how it fit into a master plan. But two is the capacity of JD and the district to get that amount of work done. I mean, we could say, hey, let's issue a $50 million bond for capital projects. That's all well and good, but he doesn't have the ability to do more than a finite number of projects on an annual basis. And it's skewed a little bit to 4.6 million next year because 2 million of it is paving in the and related expenses related to the campus roadway. So
actually, I'm not really, focusing on, how you spend that $4.65 million next year. But my major question is that, because, this is kind of a 13 years, right, capital plan, right? So I'm more focusing on, the bond we're going to issue and how much more we're going to issue beyond this $7.5 million in the next 13 years.
Over the 13-year proposal, this was the only long-term financing, was this $7.5 million.
Michael, you might remember that this is what we asked for at town meeting last year when we instituted the capital improvement plan. And remember, we went to town meeting and asked.
Well, I couldn't remember, but the things that I just had more, I was more needed.
And
you answered my question.
okay.
Actually, just one relevant thought to that too, remember, is we created the Capital Stabilization Fund last year for really two purposes. One is obviously it's basically our savings account, an emergency fund if a project should come up in a year that can't be covered by regular operating expenses from a capital perspective. But the second reason is we know there are some years in the later years of this plan where we're actually going to slow the actual capital work, and instead of allocating the cash in the budget to bond payments and capital projects, it'll be to bond payments and into the stabilization fund. Because, for example, I think it's in year 10 or 11, we need to look at that Parker Damon roof during the life of the plan, which will probably be a $3 to $4 million project. So we're going to want to be saving for that project, and we can actually use the stabilization fund as a way of saving, and that allows us not to have to keep incurring debt and making interest payments for that purpose.
Yeah, I do remember that chart that showed that curve that, we're going to how that, we're paying down that bond, and then also how we, gross that, the stabilization fund, right? I just am hoping that, because as what Dave said, is this is the only one, right, within the next 13 years, right? 30 years or 13 years? 13 years, right? That's the only one long-term bond we're going to issue. I'm hoping that's the only one, so.
And that's the plan. And just as a reminder, and you may have remembered Peter saying this once or twice last year, very unusual that a bond, even of this size, compared to the new school building, it's a tenth the size, but $7.5 million of capital improvements that didn't require a debt exclusion vote is very unusual, and that's wasn't made part of our presentation, but I think it's worth reminding that we were able to fit this in to our proposed overall budget scheme.
So I was just checking out the website that was posted that tracks and it's very nice. You've got the year, you got it broken down by school. There's the line item, the cost, a completion date, an actual cost, and a note to just talk about if it was under or over, whatever. But I think that adds quite a bit of transparency, so I appreciate that.
I will say, as it relates to the website, and you guys might notice from our last capital subcommittee meeting, I do owe a couple of updates or suggestions from that meeting I still haven't implemented.
From a big picture perspective, I want to echo Peter's comment about how impressive it is to be doing $4 million worth of work this year. And just for people who haven't looked at the numbers lately, just to remind everyone that JD is responsible for almost 1 million square feet of buildings in the district. It's a very large enterprise. And that, of course, is the lead into my next question, which is, it's great that we're doing all of this work. Not every project requires the same level of oversight and input from the district, but they all require something. And I just wanted to hear JD comment about how comfortable he was with the scope and number of projects going on given the start of the new building next year.
Actually, I feel great about it. I was, thinking about this as David was talking about, and you were talking about the comparison of retirement and OPEB versus the capital issues that we've been wrestling with since like 2015, 2014, and talking about. They both have their challenges. I mean, the way we used to do capital, which was a little bit knee-jerk, and what do we have left over at the end of the year, presented challenges mainly around legalities of procurement and how can I start this and land this, within an 8-week cycle. The challenges I have now are more related to scheduling around programming and how do I fit usually more behind the scenes type mechanical, if you think about rooftops, wiring behind walls and that kind of stuff, but not interfere with programming and try and be invisible as much as we can. So really the challenges might shift a little bit, but certainly the workload, it's helpful to have Chuck, the project manager in place. He's been fantastic and he's really starting to find his way. The capital subcommittee's been a nice group to bounce ideas off of. And, it does blow my mind a little bit, certainly. I mean, it's been a crazy year. The building project takes up a lot of time, but it's all really wonderful and exciting work, and I'm enjoying it.
Maybe you can remind me about Conant. I understand we're going to apply for the MSBA and all that, but that's an unknown. But what we know about that's a very old building. So is there any set of money, or what is the plan that we're going to look at the Conant until then,
So we have a couple things actually planned for Conant. One of the things, we still have our discretionary money from FY20 in play for this current year. And one of the things we're doing with that money is we're actually refreshing 2 of our libraries at the elementary schools across the district. So Conant will be one that we'll be looking at this coming year with some new furniture, some paint, probably a carpet, things like that. And then we're also looking at the Parker Damon Building Library as well, because they have some opportunities with their librarian on board to really re-envision what libraries do. This was actually a conversation we just had with the architect for the new school, because we're going to actually invite the principal and some of the staff from Conant and Parker Damon Building when we do the visioning process for the Library Media Center and actually start working on that, so that there's really a consistency in terms of how we approach the design of those spaces. And by capitalizing on the extensive work done in the building project now, we're actually able to do some of these educational upgrades at Conant too. The other thing we're probably going to do at Conant this summer is some repairs to pavement around the property, and that's something that Damien had requested. We had a water main break at Conant earlier this year that was repaired. It's temporarily fixed for the winter, but we want to address that as well as some of the cracks in pavement. We're probably going to do that work actually under the Charter Road contract that we do, so that we can incorporate whenever possible. We have a favorable asphalt contract right now, and where we are seeing some positive variances, opportunities like that arise, we're taking care of. Also, after the Dorr and Whittier report, and JD can probably talk to this more, but the district actually tackled some of the major issues at Conant that were highlighted in that report to make sure it was an educationally sound building. Damien has worked over the last few years, along with JD, to make sure that we have sound amplification systems available throughout the school, similar to other schools.
Front office renovation.
Yep, we did a small front office renovation in the last year and a half. We, continue to look at like smart boards, things like that, and make sure the technology is current in the building. Maybe you want to talk about heating?
Oh, I was just going to say there was a heaving issue that we had talked about for several years in this committee scenario, that we addressed that as well. And those were really the major items as we were kind of looking at Conant and how do we get through like this next phase of building in the district.
So budget-wise, I remember Conant was not included, so is all the project that you're referring to is going to be under the same budget, or is it going to be a separate item?
Well, all the ones that we just talked about have already completed. The work that we're going to do this coming year in the library will be paid for out of that $100,000 discretionary fund that was earmarked for this fiscal year that we didn't have projects for, so we've shifted some of those requests from our principals to use up that money that's currently sitting there untapped.
You know, I think our strategy with Conant right now is until we have a long-term strategy for Conant, we want to continue to do the repairs, make sure that the educational opportunities for kids are relevant. But we don't want to invest millions of dollars in a project until we know what the future of that building holds. We may, you know, Dave and I and JD actually have all had conversations that as we near the end of the Douglas Gates project, we may actually have some opportunities because if, you know, MSBA projects are designed to come in under budget, and if in fact that building project could come in under budget, we have, you know, maybe setting aside some money into our stabilization fund, and as we approach year 13 of the debt repayments here, and we all of a sudden have a significant amount of money coming off, there may be a chunk of money that the district could set aside to be able to do a fairly substantial renovation of Conant, but without necessarily having to go back to the community. That would be an interesting prospect to explore. It's far too early to get there, but it's something that we're at least batting around already.
Just with respect to Conant, the last I remember discussing that was that somewhere, whatever year X, we were kind of talking renovation as opposed to new building. But that, you know, that's several years down the road, and whatever those years bring may come up with a different solution. But right now, my understanding is that somewhere down the road, Conant would undergo a renovation.
I just want to state that I appreciate the attention to the district's capital plan, and I think like windows falling out, literally I had a daughter playing basketball at 1 hour on Saturday, and then second one came in at a different hour on Saturday to find, you know, windows crashed outside the building. So I think it's very important to set ourselves up for, you know, great educational opportunities for kids and spaces inside the buildings, but certainly we just have to keep assessing and addressing and inspecting buildings in the way that you are being very attentive to, and I appreciate that because I think that it's not just about best practices around learning, it's also about safety and whether the stairs to RJ Gray are crumbling or windows are falling out in a building where it was, you know, one of the newer, more renovated buildings in the district. It's something that demands what you are doing, so thank you.
Thank you. You know, I think, you know, we age and fall apart, and so do buildings. You know, that's
Speak for yourself.
Thank you. Thank you.
Peter, were you going to speak to the budget memos that are in here? There isn't like a cover sheet, so I can speak to that. They're included. There are budget memos for the food services and athletics included in your packet. But
Yeah. But really think about what are the high yield things within the budget that happen, and when there are opportunities to provide that same information in a memo, be able to document in a different way. I will say, you know, we had a committee member who sent in some really good feedback on the original athletic memo, that it would have been helpful to have some charts and tables, so we did update that athletic memo so you could actually see the numbers behind that. You know, we're happy to answer any questions that you have about either of those memos, but we wanted to get the information out in writing, let you digest it, and then be able to ask questions.
yes, John.
A committee member would like to thank you for the updates. And also to say that I think that this practice of using memos to communicate this kind of information is an excellent way to go forward, you know, and I would hope that you would do more of this, and that as we go forward, we would work to, insofar as possible, standardize some of the templates so that it just always looks the same.
And even though they're not here, I would like to thank both Kristen and Stephen for their reports. Their memos were very helpful.
It's not about the memo, but I think that within probably the next week, you're going to release the binding, right? The binder, the budget binder.
Correct. We are looking to release, those come out on the 19th. Yeah,
right. So when you release that binder, can you also send us the major drivers of the the budget increase? I know that Dave mentioned that those are liabilities, but I want to say more if we have more the major drivers.
Absolutely, yeah. The major drivers, actually, we got to in the first budget presentation, but what we do is include all of the presentations that we've given, so there's a little bit of history to how we develop the budget.
All right, moving on. Item 3.3, subcommittee business, policy. We have one policy ready for a vote tonight as a second read, and 3 policies for first reads with votes at the next regular meeting on February 6th. So I will give it to Amy.
Okay, so policy met on Monday afternoon. The first policy, the one that we are actually asking for your vote tonight, is the public participation policy. We didn't really get any feedback. One member said that they really appreciated moving to 3 minutes, from 2 minutes to 3 minutes. The rest is just some language changes. For example, changing his, her to their, so we're moving towards that, and just wordsmithing. So we're looking for a vote.
Move to approve.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the public participation policy passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. The next policy is our policy on educational opportunities for children in foster care. The only change that was made here was through our coordinated review. The state came in and said that we needed to add the word preschool. The previous policy said that that we're here to ensure educational stability of students in foster care and their equal access to the same free and appropriate public education through high school. And they felt very strongly that we needed to put preschool through high school. So that's the only change. And that is a first read. The next policy is residency and student enrollment. And I'm going to ask Marie to speak to this. Just so I make sure that I just want to make sure I hit all the highlights. Okay.
Thanks, Amy. So the updates to that policy come in 2 categories. One is that we had some old language around when families, kids are split between homes in 2 communities. Our language said they need to be staying in Acton or Boxborough 4 nights a week, and that's not consistent with current case law. So the current case law talks about the majority of the child's social and civic life. So we had our attorney review it and make some updates, and it talks more about that kind of thing in there. So that's one piece of the update. The second piece is that we needed to add a bullet around children in foster care. This was a second piece of the feedback from the Department of Ed in the coordinated program review. So those are the 2 major flavors of the changes, and it's a first read.
Many times I got asked that if a kid coming from overseas, they stay with their relatives here, that will be considered resident, right?
No, it doesn't work that way.
Oh, it doesn't work?
No. They, it's where their family, they live with their family, where their family lives. They can't come and live with other people and go to school here. It doesn't work that way.
But if the people are the caregiver, then no?
No, so if you know of anyone who has any specific questions, have them call us. We have a registrar's office, and we work very closely with individuals to do placement. I'm happy to talk to you offline, Angie, or to talk to whomever you're talking about.
But essentially, the law is that you can't go to a town just to attend their schools. And so there's a complexity around that that's really a case-by-case basis.
All right. Were there any other questions or?
Okay. No? Okay. So the third policy on a first read is around school ceremonies and religious holidays. So there was a change. You can see we changed the title to religious and cultural holidays to be more inclusive. And then you can see the last paragraph addresses that the Acton-Boxborough Regional School District will not, so students will not be penalized for late homework, assignments, quizzes, tests, or other educational expectations due to missed school days for recognized holidays as long as the teacher is notified appropriately and the schoolwork is made up in the timeframe detailed in the procedures acknowledging religious holidays. And I think we just need to make a quick change to religious and cultural holidays. But that's it. That's the update for that policy.
Yeah, I just have a quick question on this one around the definition of the term recognized holidays. So I know that we do put a list of holidays on the back of our school calendar, and will that be the recognized list of holidays, or might there be other holidays that an individual might recognize individually that would then be appropriate for them to ask for not being penalized for late work?
So in the past, we've put the Department of Ed's list of all holidays on the back of the calendar. What we talked about doing, and internally we've distributed to teachers, here are the holidays on which you can't assign homework or assessments. We're going to put that list, the list of holidays that we've determined do not have homework or assessments, on the back of the calendar so that families will know. Now, if there are any other holidays that kids celebrate, then that's in there as well, as they just need to tell their teacher, I celebrate this holiday, I won't be in school, I can't take an assessment, won't be doing homework, whatever, and then they have 2 weeks to make that up.
Okay, so that term recognized holidays, we're interpreting fairly broadly per individual. If I as an individual recognize this holiday and it's not Pet My Dog holiday, then we'll leave that to the teacher's discretion most often?
No, I think the recognized holidays are the days that we won't have assessments and homework. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess then my suggestion might be that we in the language of the policy, stipulate that recognized holidays as defined somewhere else, either as an attachment to this policy or as identified on the school calendar.
Okay, we'll take a look at that. Thank you, Adam.
Yep.
So another clarification is the assessment and the homework for those days. So how is that? Because I heard some feedback is that they still have to make it up. So is that how it works? And for the religious holiday, and so they're not gonna have homework or assessment, but when they come back, they still have to make it up for the homework and the assessment. Is that how it works?
So Angie, if there's a long list of holidays for which there will not be homework or assessment around the holidays, and that includes holidays that I believe the language in the procedure affects a large number of our students. So some days we don't have school, other days we don't have homework and assessment. Those include Diwali and Lunar New Year, no homework or assessment the day of or the day after those holidays. So it's when there's a much smaller group of kids who might celebrate a holiday, if they celebrate that holiday, notify their teacher, they have 2 weeks to make that up. Okay?
I understand that. Amy, in terms of policy reviews, has the policy committee reviewed policy KBA, the school parent relations goals, recently?
Policy KBA,
Yeah.
School Parent Relations Goal.
It started, I'll just read the first paragraph. It is the general goal of the district to foster relationships with parents which encourage cooperation between the home and the school in establishing and achieving common educational goals for students.
Well, if you look at the policy down at the bottom,
Yeah.
there is a date of when it was last reviewed and voted, or I think it's at the bottom.
And that date is June 2014.
So that was the last day we looked, that was the last time we looked at it.
So the comment that I'd like to make is that every two-parent family has the challenge of aligning the ideas of parent A and parent B, and every child, of course, has explored the possibility of dividing parent A and parent B, and it's always complicated to keep those things coordinated, but both parents, obviously have the interest of the child in mind. In that spirit, it strikes me that the school-parent relations goals is insufficiently ambitious with respect to what we would really like to do in terms of providing an environment for children growing up in integrating the activities of families and the schools. I fully recognize why, in many ways, it's easier to, keep more of a separation of church and state, but from the perspective of helping children grow up, a tighter cooperation would be beneficial in my view. So I would like the policy.
So I think the policy subcommittee, we can take a look at that.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't discuss it tonight because it's not
No.
on the agenda, but okay.
This is a request to look at it with a reason why I think it should be examined.
We'll add it to the list.
Thank you, Amy. All right, so those other three policies, if you have any additional feedback, you can send that to Amy to be talked about at the next policy subcommittee meeting, and then we will look at those for a second read and a vote, possible vote next time. School building committee.
My name's not on the list anymore.
No. That looks like you, Peter.
School building project update. We had a school building committee meeting last night. We had invited Consigli Construction Company, who is now on board as the construction manager for the project. They did a short introduction, and then Arrow Street Architects actually provided a design update and laid out the timeline for the development of the design of the building over the next 4 to 5 months. There are 3 different series of cost estimates that continue to happen as the design develops to make sure that the budget continues to come in where it's expected to come in, with opportunities to value engineer as we go and as needed. We do actually anticipate some early work happening on the project over February vacation. We are intending to begin drilling for some of the geothermal wells. Those will be some of the test wells that we need to do in order to better scale the depth and temperature at which our geothermal system can operate, and that will give us a better handle on the number of wells that we do. That's an important step in the project. The good news is once they drill the 1 or 2 wells that they need for test wells, those will actually just be capped and left in place, and those will become wells for the project. That will help us get a better handle on costs for the geothermal system. And then as we go into the spring, just after students leave, we'll actually be doing septic work for the site and really breaking ground on the project. We're anticipating foundations will start to be dug and then laid from summer through fall and into early winter, and then we'll start seeing steel go up over the course of the winter next year. So that's kind of just a broad brush picture of the overall timeline of the building, but we're really now getting into the nitty-gritty of how things are going to operate while we're under construction and what's happening kind of on that monthly basis.
I have a question about the septic system. So in the Acton town meeting and that West Acton, the septic plan was defeated, right? So we used to plan to, connect to that and then pay the service, right? So how because that defeated, so how that impact, our septic plan for, this?
Sure, that's a great question. So we actually, because there was no sewer system in Acton at the time that the project was proposed, we were required by MSBA to design the building with its own independent septic system. So that actually was the design of the building going into the town vote. If the sewer system had passed, we could have hooked up to the sewer, but we already have a design in place for a septic system on the building. We actually received good news. Acton, the Board of Health, approved a variance to the flow rate, and we already have DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, approval to move ahead with the septic system as we've designed it. So those are some really good early indicators in terms of that part of the project. I will also say, as Dave updated on the bond for the capital improvement plan, Dave and I and Marie have a staff level meeting with our financial advisor coming up at the end of January, along with our treasurer, Margaret, to start exploring the bonding for the new building and the capital project at the same time. By issuing the bonds at the same time, we end up saving on costs of issuance. So there's some advantage to doing that. So we're going to be nailing that down. We'll certainly bring more information to the committee as we have details of that after that staff meeting.
All right, item 3.4 is school committee liaison reports. Diane, did you want to talk about the ALG municipal budget review?
I'm going to toss that one over.
Oh, I did not see John's hand. Sorry. John, do you have something else?
I do, and it's really a question of if Peter has something else. And the question is, for those monthly updates, how are you planning to communicate that to the school community and the community at large?
Monthly updates, can you be more specific about which monthly updates?
Well, I mean, you just talked about these things that were sort of happening month by month, geothermal things, stuff like that. It seems to me that there will be people in the community that will be interested in what's going on, and certainly the school community will want to know. So the question is, how are we going to keep them informed, you know, a month or two in advance as things are going along?
Sure. So Consigli actually has an entire communication division attached to it. So they'll actually help us by taking over a lot of the communications for us. We will have a section of the building, our website, devoted to building project updates. Once we're kind of built and the exterior is built, they actually have some 360-degree cameras that they insert into different sections of the building so people in the community can kind of see the progress as it goes. They also work with the abutters to develop an abutters list to make sure that they're almost on a weekly basis communicating with people surrounding the construction so people know what's going on.
Sorry, John. I really didn't see you.
I'm going to call upon John again. I had a work-related commitment, and I think, John, you did go to the municipal budget presentation, and I was not there. So
I did miss you. I did go, and I ate 2 cookies, one for me and one for you. The municipal budget was not particularly controversial. It came in at, I think, exactly a 3.0% increase. There are some negotiations that are ongoing that could change that, I suppose, a little bit. I think the thing that was most relevant to this group is that with the approval of the fire station, the town is also planning to go out to bond, and they also are going to go out and issue a hybrid note, 30 years for the fire station and shorter term to cover some things that they have engaged in short-term borrowing for a fire engine and something else, so that their hybrid will be a 30-year plus a 5 and a 10-year piece, with the total note being about $14 million. And other than that, there was this discussion of the Middlesex retirement, and I think, you know, post this meeting, you know, I would like to send some of the information that you provided over to the town, because I think that this was a much more helpful presentation.
I was the lone attendee of the BLF meeting that happened on Tuesday night, and it was pretty uneventful. They're having their budget Saturday this Saturday, and we are not required to go. They were very happy with our 1.4% proposal for the budget this year, and the next BLF meeting is February 11th. I think I'll also add, but it wasn't on the agenda, that as the liaison to the CPAC, I also attended their meeting last night, and they are planning a dyslexia listening session for February 1st at the Sargent Library. So if you're interested in that, look for their posting. Next, we have a consent agenda. There are 3 items on the consent agenda, including correcting the FY21 school calendar's last day of school, which was added in the addendum. We also have some donations to accept, and so does anyone want to hold any of those items, or otherwise I will take a motion.
Move to approve with gratitude for all three, including the corrected calendar.
Is there a second? Oh, sorry, didn't hear you. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, those all pass unanimously. We have warrants to sign tonight. There are 3 warrants on the agenda now being circulated. Vendor warrants 20-0014 and 20-0014 PR in the total amount of $2,541,694.23, and payroll warrant P2014 in the total amount of $2,697,288.68. Thank you for signing those as they go around. And the FYIs at the end, actually, we neglected to add that with the new year comes thoughts of town elections already. So Acton's annual election is March 31st. We have 3 members who are up for re-election, 3 seats. So this, usually we ask members what their intentions are, just so that the public knows what they may be doing. So there are 3 members who have seats open in Acton, and 2, including myself, in Boxborough. Ironically, Boxborough's last day to file a nomination is the same day as Acton's actual election. So Boxborough members have some time to decide, but Paul, do you?
I won't be running.
I won't be running.
Amy?
I may regret it, but I will be running.
I will be running in Boxborough. Michael?
Most likely, I will be running.
Great. So in Acton, the last day to obtain papers is February 7th, and the last day to file those papers is February 11th. In Boxborough, I couldn't find on the website the last day to obtain papers, but the last day to file them is not until March 31st, and then the election is not until May 19th. All right. Is there anything you want to?
Yeah, that's great. I just want to, we've highlighted this in a number of different ways over the last couple of weeks, and they're sending this out directly to families. But on January 14th at 7:00 p.m. in the high school auditorium, we are very fortunate to be bringing in Janelle Burley-Hoffman, who will be doing a presentation on raising tech-healthy families together. That is for our families. I just wanted to push that out to all of our families and try and get people there. That's a great presentation we're excited to do. And then just in previewing a coming agenda, the next time we meet is for Budget Saturday. We're finalizing all of the budget binders right now. One thing we did very intentionally this year was we pulled the larger elements of this year's budget out of Budget Saturday and tried to present them in smaller chunks earlier in the budget process. For example, kindergarten is probably the greatest example of that, where we held a series of presentations over the course of the fall, really actually starting last year, but over the course of this fall, leading up to that school committee vote in December, because we received some feedback last year that people felt like all of the information came on Budget Saturday, and then there were some expectations of the committee to try and vote on that immediately. So we actually intentionally tried to start those presentations earlier that might have some of the deeper questions. I just didn't want you to get to Budget Saturday and feel left out, that we're not redoing all of those same presentations again. We'll certainly have a kindergarten quick update. We will have a very quick capital update because it's there's a lot of money tied up in that. But those presentations have now been done. The one presentation, there's a couple things we're focusing on Budget Saturday. Obviously, all of the overview information. Marie will present kind of some of the overview of staffing again on Budget Saturday, in particular focusing on some of the general education requests. But the real panel presentation that we're putting together for that day is under special education, because we realize we're making some significant shifts in that area, and that's the one presentation we really haven't done yet. So it's a bit of an abbreviated version of a Budget Saturday because those presentations have been pulled out, but I just wanted to make sure we're intentional about the reason we did that and it wasn't left to guesswork. So thank you.
Well, and for those who are planning ahead and those Boxborough residents who are disappointed about Winterfest, we're planning on ending by lunchtime. So whereas other budget Saturdays have lasted until later in the afternoon. Yes, so everyone can go to Winterfest.
Actually,
Well,
you know,
so there's-
actually, that, probably the most important question of the night. Our presentations are scheduled to end, I believe, at 12. And then there's a period of time for school committee discussion and deliberation until 12:30. We, right now, are holding a spot for an optional lunch. If people want to stay for lunch, we can certainly, do some orders. But if there's not a lot of interest in staying for lunch, we would probably be done at 12:30 or whenever close to that the committee's done with deliberations. So we'll have Beth maybe send out an email to everyone asking whether or not you're interested in having the lunch afterwards. Yeah, the timing of it really allowed us to get things done. And the reason, again, you can go have lunch at Winterfest too. But again, the reason is we've pulled out those presentations that traditionally have been delayed. So that's the idea.
All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Great.